Hi everybody, it's Richard here again, and welcome to part 2 of my Nick Lowe spotlight. In this one I'm going to be looking at the years 1976 to 1981 when Nick was part of Rockpile, and also he was a very in-demand producer. So, excuse me. So where we left off was with Brinsley Schwarz has split up, and Nick got himself fired from United Artists, and so he was without a record contract. Now Jack Riviera from UA and Dave Robinson, who was the Brinsley Schwarz manager, borrowed some money from one of the guys off Dr. Feelgood to form a label, and they formed the Stiff label. I think it was about £400 to £500 they borrowed, but they gave Nick Lowe £45 to go in and record a single on its B-side, and it became the very first Stiff single, which is this one. It is So It Goes, with the B-side Heart of the City. So that's the first. Okay, this is a reissue, it's not the actual original. I think it's from 1980 or so forth. But that's the first single on Stiff Records, released in 1976. Also in 76, Nick produced this album here for Graham Parker, and this is Howlin' Wind. This is a fantastic LP, so it is. So this is Graham Parker's debut, and again, as I say, Nick Lowe produced. Now, as we go into 1977, the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to show you the actual releases that Nick did first, and then some of the production stuff, some of the albums he produced. So, in 77, he released the second single, which is a cover of the old song done by Billy Fury, Halfway to Paradise, which is a weird cover. It's good, but I don't understand why he did it. But the B-side of this is called I Don't Want the Night to End, which is a great new wave number. So this is also in Stiff Records, as is the Bowie EP, which he did. Now, I think most people know the story about this. Whenever David Bowie released his album Lowe, L-O-W, Nick is called Nick Lowe, L-O-W-E. He then decided to release an EP called Bowie and drop the E on it. So this is a 4-track EP with Born a Woman, Shake That Rat, Mary Provost and The Endless Sleep. It's very, very good. Okay, so we're still in 1977, and he produced, we're going to production, yeah. This is the debut single from Reckless Eric, and this is A Whole Wide World. It's the only song he actually produced for Reckless Eric, and it's actually his most famous. The the Proclaimers covered this in the 2000s on their Life With You album. He didn't write it, he just produced it. So that's Reckless Eric, Whole Wide World. Right, also in 77, he produced this album here that came out. This is the Damned's debut album. The New Rose single was obviously produced by him as well, which came out in 76, which is also featured on this. So yeah, the Damned's debut album, regarded as probably the first UK punk album produced by Nick Lowe. Next up, and we get what we call really the first Rockpile album. Now Rockpile, before I show this, were Nick Lowe, Dave Edmunds, Billy Bremner and Terry Williams. Now Dave Edmunds obviously had a successful career with some of his singles in the early 70s, like I Hear You Knocking and Born to Be With You and Baby I Love You. But as I said before, Dave Edmunds produced the last Brinsley Schwarz album. They then formed a band, Rockpile. But unfortunately, Dave Edmunds did not sign to Stiff Records, and I think Jack Riviera was a bit peeved of it. He went and he signed to Led Zeppelin's Swan Song label, which meant that Rockpile could not record an album under the name Rockpile until Edmonds had handed in 4 albums. I think he signed a 4-album contract. So the first of Dave Edmonds' albums is Get It, and this is essentially a Rockpile album, and it features the hit single written by Nick Lowe, I Knew the Bride. There's a couple of other Nick Lowe songs on here, like Let's Talk About Us and Here Comes the Weekend. I think those 2 are actually credited to Edmonds and Lowe, but how much Dave Edmonds had on this, I don't know. So that's Get It from 77. Also from 77, the critically acclaimed Elvis Costello debut album, My Aim Is True, produced by Nick Lowe. Excellent album. Allison, The Angels Wanna Wear My Red Shoes, and one of my personal favourites off this is Less Than Zero. So this is 1977. My Aim Is True, produced by Nick. We also have, in 77, he produced Graham Parker's 3rd album, Stick to Me. Now, he wasn't set up to produce this, but something happened with the tapes that were originally done. I think they oxidized or something, and they had very little money, and they thought, we have to record this album again, and we have to do it on the cheap. How do we do this? We get Nick Lowe. And it's a fair enough album. It's pretty good. It's not as good as Graham Parker's first one, or Heat Treatment, the second one, which Nick Lowe had nothing to do with. But still, good production, decent enough album. So then we go on to 1978, and Jake Riviera leaves Stiff and sets up a new label called Radar. And guess what? Who has the first single on Radar? And it's Nick Lowe again, with I Love the Sound of Breaking Glass. So this was released in 78, and this became his biggest hit single. Actually, this got top 10. He also released the first album on Radar, which is The Jesus of Cool, and this is an excellent album. This also features So It Goes on it and Mary Provis from the Bowie EP, as well as I Love the Sound of Breaking Glass. This was released in America under the title Pure Pop for Now People, and it had a slightly different track listing. It included the Bay City Rollers tribute song Rollers Show, and also it included the song, they called it Rock instead of Shakin' Pop, which is essentially the same song but with slightly different lyrics. And as you see, there are 6 pictures of Nick Lowe on the front, but in actual fact the one at the bottom middle is actually Dave Edmonds. It's not Nick Lowe, it's Dave Edmonds disguising himself as Nick Lowe. So this is essentially, again, a Rockpile album. And there's another single taken off this, which was co-written with Dave Edmonds, and this is Little Hitler. But on the B side of this is the Brinsley Schwarz version of Cruel to Be Kind, which is a very keyboard heavy version. It's not as good, but it's still interesting to hear. So carrying on, in 1978 he also released this single, American Squirm, which is a standalone single. It wasn't on any LP apart from compilations. But the B-side of this is credited to Nick Lowe and Friends, and it's a version of What's So Funny About Peace, Love and Understanding. But in actual fact, this is the actual recording that got on to Elvis Costello's Armed Forces album in America in 1979. So the Brits over here, to get that song, you had to buy this single here, which is American Squirm. Also in 1978, this was released. This is Stiff Live Stiffs, which is a live album recorded in 77, which featured Nick Lowe, as you can see him in the front there. And behind him with the longer hair is Larry Wallace, who I know nothing about. Elvis Costello, Reckless Eric and Ian Jury. and this is not bad, and you get a good version of I Knew the Bride When She Was Rock and Roll sung by Nick on this. So this was also released in 78. Production wise, he produced this for Dave Edmunds. This is Tracks on Wax 4, which is another Rockpile album. And this features the absolutely fantastic Lowe Edmunds composition Deborah, which is like a Buddy Holly type song. It's like a Peggy Sue type song. Also features Television, written by the two, and Trouble Boys, which was actually written by Billy Bremner, the other guitarist in Rockpile. Now there's a version on here of Heart of the City, which is also on Nick Lowe's Jesus is Cool album. They are the same recording, but what happened was they took Nick Lowe's vocals off and Dave Edmunds did vocals for himself in the studio, added it on, and you know, it became the last track on side 2. I personally prefer the Nick Lowe version because it is the actual true live version. But this is a very, very good album. It's a very rock and roll album. You find with Rockpile, with the Lowe and the Dave Edmunds, that the Lowe ones were more pop and Dave Edmunds was more rockabilly, rock and roll. But this is excellent. Also, in 1978, well, he produced this absolute classic, which is This Year's Model by Elvis Costello. This is a reissue. It doesn't have that thingy bobby bit down the side, which I don't like anyway. And this features I Don't Want to Go to Chelsea and Pump It Up, and some great songs like No Action, Lip Service, Lipstick Vogue, Hand in Hand. This is a fantastic album, again produced by Nick Lowe. Also in 1978, side 1 of this album by Mickey Jupp, or is it Jupp or Jupp? I'm not too sure. Side 1 is Mickey Jupp or Jupp, backed by the Rockpile band, basically. That's all it is. So this is Mickey Jupp and Rockpile for side 1. Side 2, he is different musicians, but this is not half bad either. And we're still in 1978, and this is Dr. Feelgood's Private Practice. I know Nick did write a song for their 77 album, but I can't remember the name of it and I don't have it. But here he wrote 2 songs, It Wasn't Me, and he had a co-write on their only ever hit single, Milk and Alcohol. So whenever you hear Milk and Alcohol, that's a Nick Lowe song. He never recorded it himself, but this is on Dr. Feelgood's Private Practice, and it's not a bad album. And so we're still in 1978, and this is Carleen Carter, and all he did with this one was provide a few backing vocals, and they probably wooed her as well because he ended up marrying her. So this is the future Mrs. Lowe. So this is Carleen Carter's, I think it's her debut album actually, and Carleen Carter is obviously the daughter of June Carter and the stepdaughter of Johnny Cash. So we go into 1979, and the first single to be released in 79 was Crackin' Up, with the non-album B-side Basing Street. And also we have the second single is Cruel to Be Kind, which was a decent enough sized hit for him. Those 2 songs featured on his 1979 album, and this is a brilliant album, Labour of Lust. Johnny Cash also covered the song from this, Without Love, which Nick produced on his Rockabilly Blues album, which I forgot to bring out. I don't have the LP, I've got the CD. But yeah, this is a Rockpile album, and incidentally this one and this one by Dave Edmunds go together. This is Repeat When Necessary. These 2 were recorded at the same time, and if you look on YouTube you will see the documentary Born Fighters, which just shows the band and, you know, working on both albums. Both were successful. Singles wise, this was slightly more successful as it featured Girls Talk, written by Elvis Costello, and Queen of Hearts, which I think was a hit in America for Juice Newton. Also, the single Crawling from the Wreckage was written by Graham Parker. I always thought this was a completely covers album until I realised that two of the songs were written by George Murray, who in fact was Billy Bremner. Creature from the Black Lagoon and Bad is Bad. So it's not fully covers, because although Nick doesn't write anything on this, Billy Bremner does, and all songs in this are written by Nick himself. And for Rockpile, these are the two that most people would go for. Also in 1979 we have this absolute classic album. This was produced again by Nick Lowe. This is Armed Forces by Elvis Costello and the Attractions, and this is the UK version. No harm to our American friends, this is the proper version with the proper cover, with the proper song Somebody's Best on it. I always felt that what's so funny about Peace, Love and Understanding should never have been on this. It just doesn't fit. So this was one of Elvis's, this is my favourite Elvis Costello album, and it's got the fantastic Accidents Will Happen, and the even more fantastic Oliver's Army. So we're still in 1979, and we have again Carleen Carter's second album called Two Sides to Every Woman, and Nick co-writes one of the songs off here, and this is around the time that Nick and Carleen got married. We also have the production of Stop Your Sobbing by the Pretenders, the Pretenders' first single, and it is, as you can see there, produced by Nick Lowe. Now, in 1980, Dave Edmunds had recorded 3 albums for Swan Song, and he finally handed in his 4th album, which wasn't released until 81, but Swan Song already had it, which meant that Rockpile were able now to go and record under the name Rockpile, and they did. And this is it, Seconds of Pleasure, and this is not a bad album. It is split in 2. I think that the actual Nick Lowe tracks are far better than the Dave Edmunds ones. There is a couple of old songs on this. For example, Play That Fast Thing One More Time was an old Brinsley Schwartz number, and the song Fool Too Long, which was written by Lowe, had been knocking about for about 5 years. But this has got the cover of Teacher Teacher on it, which is brilliant, and it was used in that Bad Teacher soundtrack with Cameron Diaz a few years ago. When I Write the Book could really have come from Labour of Lust. It's a brilliant song. Now and Always is lovely. But one of the highlights on this is the Lowe Rockpile song, but it was sung by Billy Bremner, and that was Heart, and it's a very Motowny Supremacy type song. So this is not a bad album, and you do get, well, if you can find it, a free EP where Nick Lowe and Dave Edmunds sing the Everly Brothers. So that's Rockpile's Seconds of Pleasure from 1980, and the 2 singles released from that were this one here, which is Wrong Way, which is a Squeeze song that they never actually recorded. Well, they did record it actually, they never released it. It came out as a green flexi disc with one of the pop magazines back in the very, very early, probably 1980 or 81. And then the other single was the brilliant Teacher Teacher. So those are the 2 singles from that album. Also in 1980 he produced this fantastic album as well. This is Get Happy by Elvis Costello and the Attractions. So for me, and I'm not being biased here, but the best Elvis Costello albums have been produced by Nick Lowe. I think so anyway. I think it's the peak of his powers, the late 70s, early 80s. So this is another cracking album. And this also here is like a Rockpile album. None of the songs are written by them, but This is Carleen Carter's Musical Shapes. This is Carleen Carter backed by the four guys: Nick Lowe, Dave Edmunds, Billy Bremner and Terry Williams. And on this you get actually Baby Ride Easy is a duet with Dave Edmunds, and you can see it on YouTube. This is a good album. And so we get into 1981. Now by the end of 1980, Rockpile more or less had split up, that was it. But the album that Dave Edmunds handed in to Swan Song finally came out in 1981, so it featured most of the Rockpile people. And in fact it did feature the Rockpile band, and this is Twangin'. And this is not actually a bad album. It's got It's Been So Long, which is a great cover of the Ian Gom song from the Brinsley Schwartz album, Nervous on the Road. The singles off this were Singing the Blues, Almost Saturday Night, which was written by John Fogerty, and The Race Is On, which was like a duet with the Stray Cats. But by this time, that was it for Rockpile. Now, we'll carry on with 81, and Carleen Carter releases Blue Nun, and Dave Edmunds was gone, but Nick Lowe's all over this, and there's quite a few songs on this which are co-written with Nick, by this time her husband, and again this is a good album. And finally, in production wise, we have another classic produced by Nick, and this is Elvis Costello's Trust. So that's it for the Rockpile years. The next one will be the 80s and beyond. So what happened was that Nick Lowe obviously went solo. He formed little bands, but he is essentially a solo artist. So, and Dave Edmunds went solo himself and worked with various people like Jeff Lynne and so forth, and became a very... He was almost an in-demand session musician as well, because I know he played on the Carl Perkins special from the mid-80s that featured George Harrison and Ringo Starr. Billy Bremner released his first solo album in '84, and Terry Williams went to drum for many groups as a session musician, but most famously he drummed with Dire Straits around the time of the Brothers in Arms tour. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that. That's part 2, and now to file all these records away again. Okay, so all the best now. Bye bye.